Week 7 of the NFL is underway, and we have our fantasy football lineup set for redraft and dynasty, most likely by this point. But there's still some time for more, and that leads us nicely into our DFS with Fantasy Gameday and also pricing for DraftKings. Ed, we start the way as we always do, which is the top game lines. And this week, I say it was every week, the Cowboys.
It's whoever the Cowboys are playing.
It's Cowboys Commanders this week. I'm interested this hadn't gone down at all over the week as McLaurin's been confirmed out. Debo's looking unlikely to play. But this is what we've got on the slate at the moment. So firstly, let's remind ourselves of why this should be such a points fest then. So the Cowboys are currently giving up the most fantasy points per game to quarterbacks, the third most to running backs, and the most to wide receivers. Commanders are a bit better than that, but they're still going to the seventh most fantasy points per game to quarterbacks, 14th most to running backs, and 13th most to wide receivers. So they're bottom half in the league for all metrics, both these teams. Add into that mix that Dak is QB3 in fantasy points per game, Pickens is wide receiver 5, Lamb is wide receiver 6. Granted, that is only on the 2 games that he's appeared in so far. And Jake Ferguson is tight end 1. Washington haven't been as strong on offense, but Daniels will need to do a lot this week, and JCM may also benefit. As we said, McLaurin is out, Debo maybe too. So Chris Moore, Luke McCaffrey, and Jalen Lane are all risky, but potentially appealing picks at 2,200 and 3,000 on DraftKings. More and more later, but pairing him with Daniels was in consideration for my stack of the week this week as well. Jake Ferguson, I'll be honest, I've disrespected him by not putting him on this graphic. Given his £4,200, tight end 1, yet only the 5th most expensive tight end on Fantasy Gameday, I'll be grabbing him in some lineups, that is for certain. I really like most people will. I really like Prescott and Pickens stat this week. It gives you little room to spend elsewhere, but you'd expect it would probably pay up and I think give you a good haul. Pickens 2, though, will come up again on this show. I'm just not quite. This is a game, actually, I think, although we know what happens when any time a team plays the Cowboys and the Cowboys get far in offense, I think I would possibly, for the first time this season, go the under with the Cowboys on this one, though.
Yeah, as you mentioned with the Commanders, obviously with Daniels not being there consistently, and they've been a bit up and down on offense. And I suppose the Cowboys, on offense are also maybe due a down game. So I still think there'll be points in it, but I agree whether it will pass that very high line, I'm not convinced.
Before we move on to your stack of the week, I said we are going to revisit this game later. Please do take a moment to subscribe, to like, and to give us a share as well. We have our streaming options show for this week live, as well as the Week 7 overall preview. Then we go all over again on Monday with our review of Week 7. Our stacks then, Ed, for people who aren't familiar with DFS, stacking is where you are combining a quarterback with a receiving option, basically to stack your points. A touchdown is therefore getting you the 4 from the QB and the 6 from the wide receiver, plus any of the receiving yards on top as well. And you're looking for an option that scored very highly because of that exact reason last week.
Indeed, yeah. I think I'm fairly confident that they're going to have a good week. And yeah, as you can see from the screen, I'm going for Drake May and Kayshon Boutte. I think it shows how far Drake May's come, that he's the 6th most expensive QB option this week. But it's fully deserved. He's currently QB5 with 4 top 10 QB performances in 6 weeks. 2 of those were top 3 QB performances. So he's in excellent form. And he's very much feasted against poor defenses, racking up big scores against the likes of Miami and then the Saints last week. This week, the Patriots have got the Titans, who aren't the worst on defense, but they certainly aren't the best. And they sit middle of the pack in terms of fantasy points per game, giving up to QBs and wide receivers. I just think Boutte is good value after his first fantasy relevant week since week 1 against the Saints last week. He hauled in all 5 of his targets, 2 of them for touchdowns. Now, Diggs is clearly still May's top target and probably the safer pick ahead of Boutte. But I just think with this stack, it gives you an extra kind of £1,800 on Fantasy Gameday to invest elsewhere. So I think if I was plugging in a stack anywhere, it's going to be May and Boutte. And I hope that Boutte has a similar sort of conversion percentage as he did last week, because I don't think he will get as many targets as Diggs.
It is worth monitoring as well that even after logging a full practice, just looking most recent update is Stephon Diggs is still questionable at the moment. So that could just turbocharge this stat, couldn't it? If Diggs did miss out or was limited in any way, that just kind of makes it even more appealing, doesn't it, in that situation?
Yeah, definitely. I think, Boutte looked good with May last week, and, May is looking excellent. So I think both receivers will benefit this week.
I am going for another year 2 combo for my stack of the week. I'm looking at Caleb Williams and Rome Odunze. We've spoken about this pairing a lot, and I am going to kind of give that little health warning. I did say on the review show this week, it was curious to see how well spread the targets were at wide receiver for the Bears last week coming off the bye. So this is kind of going a little bit against my own caution from earlier in the week. Why it is appealing, though, is Saints are giving up 54 points combined to quarterbacks and wide receivers each week, and are the 4th worst in the league for EPA. So that's expected points added, alongside conceding 14 passing touchdowns. Although Odunze was quiet in week 6, I'm expecting a return to being the target leader. I think, although it was of question last week, I do think that's what just seems like the most logical outcome this time round. And Ed, we are on quite the roll with this, so I'm going to throw in for the viewers a TH touchdown guarantee. This is the 6th we've thrown out this season, and we are 5 for 5 so far. So go and stake everything on Rome Odunze getting a touchdown. Leaves you with £4,400 on Fantasy Gameday per player and $5,371 on DraftKings. So it does give you a little bit of room for maneuver on this one as well, which is also what I quite like when I'm going for a stack. I mean, I can still plug in an elite piece or two elsewhere. Are you ready?
No, I was just going to say that we did talk about the receivers at the Bears, and we look for outliers, don't we? And I think Odunze was trending towards being the top target, and I think we can maybe look at last week more as an outlier, and I'd be very surprised if he doesn't return to being Williams' number 1 target this week. So I'll be watching that with interest.
We'll move on then to our secret stack of the week. And this week, I'm following on from Tom making his return to TH Fantasy Football Show with us on Friday. And one of his plug-and-play QBs was Spencer Rattler. So I'm following on with that really from the secret stack this week. So I've got Rattler and Olave. It's the exact same matchup. So I'm going the other side of my stack with Odunze and Williams here. And it's because the Bears conceding the 6th most fantasy points going to quarterbacks and the 9th most fantasy points going to wide receivers. And I think for this to work, the Saints need a defense that are going to be leaky on points because they are not putting up huge points on their own regards. Game line of 46.5. So it's got an outside chance of becoming a shootout, I think. That's once again got to be kind of balanced with the fact that the Saints do only have a season high of 26 points in the game so far. Olave, though, is averaging 10.6 targets per game. So there is a route to this paying off. And also the thing that you always get from a secret stack is, firstly, it could go horribly wrong. It could pay off big time. But what it does allow you as well is much more expenditure elsewhere on your roster. So this would leave you with just under £5,000 per player remaining on Fantasy Gameday and $5,600 on DraftKings. Ed, you always poo-poo my secret stacks, and I've got quite a good record of them achieving above value so far. Am I going to have another one here last week, or are you going to poo-poo me once more?
No, I think this is a solid shout. Rattler has been, impressive might be pushing it, but he's certainly looked okay. And Olave, we spoke about preseason as it being an important season for him, and he's been solid. Maybe gone under the radar slightly, but he is getting the target. So I think it is a very good value. And I think you're right. I think it probably will achieve above price and get you some decent value.
If you are playing on Fantasy Game Day and you're playing the Classic Star game, then you will be looking for your captain pick as well. And the obvious captain pick for me this week isn't the one I've gone for. The obvious one is Jonathan Taylor, but
He's
it's the
very
top price
expensive.
player. You can't just put the top price player captain pick. It seems a bit lazy as far as putting your suggestions in. So we're in a little bit cheaper. And I'm going for George Pickens. Now, we've mentioned the game already, so all of the above stands for that. We've got that great game environment. And I think one of the things that appeals me about Pickens is that he may be not plugged in as many places if people are unsure about what CD Lamb's return may do to his target share as well. But CD Lamb will be attracting some of that coverage, likely not 100%. And the last time we saw them playing together, we did have that outcome where Pickens still got 9 targets for 68 yards and a touchdown. Since then, we've seen the evidence of it for the last couple of weeks. He's built up quite the rapport with Dak Prescott. So my captain pick of the week is Mr. George Pickens. Would you be playing Pickens anywhere? Have you got your eye on anyone else for the captain pick?
Yeah, I agree. Pickens is a great pick for captain. I mean, I don't. Maybe it's a bit of a stretch for a captain, but I do fancy Quinshon Judkins to have a big week. I think he's due a big bounce back after quite a quiet week against the Dolphins. He's got the Dolphins this week, so he's due that bounce back after a difficult week against the Steelers. The Dolphins are giving up the 5th most fantasy points per game to running backs. He's great value at £5,800. And I do see Cleveland running all over Miami. So Judkins is going to be the main beneficiary of that. As I say, maybe a stretch for captain, but I definitely will be plugging Judkins into quite a few lineups.
We did look, though, a couple of shows ago at the top 3 scorers week by week. And every single time there was a player that we wouldn't have expected to be there. And as we always say over and over again, where there's a route to it happening, it feels like a reasonable gamble to plug in, doesn't it? That if it pays off, you are laughing because not many other people will have gone for that, will they?
Definitely, yeah. I just can't see Judkins scoring less than kind of like 20 points this week. So I fancy him for a touchdown. I'm not going to give it as a guarantee, but yeah, I do fancy him for a touchdown and plenty of yards.
If you haven't played on Fantasy Game Day yet, then why not try this week using promo code THFF1, which will give you 1 free play with your first paid entry. We move on to our bargain basket pick, and we say each time there's different sorts of bargain basket pick we go for. Sometimes we go for that player that we're just taking a gamble that it could be their week, but there's not necessarily anything to indicate it. Our Justice Hill gamble paid off beautifully a couple of weeks ago. This one is more based on a player that is good value because of what has happened throughout the week with injuries. So McLaurin, we know, won't be playing this week. Deebo Samuel's potentially out. So Chris Moore figures to potentially have a good role. He featured heavily by his standards last week. His ADOT, so his average depth of target, is 13.8 yards this year, albeit only on 12 targets. So it's not the largest sample size. But the reason is the exact same reason we're targeting the Cowboys-Commanders game anyway. The Cowboys giving it the most fantasy points game to wide receivers. I think that the Commanders are probably going to be chasing to keep in it, therefore maybe a bit more pass-heavy than we've seen them previously. So Chris Moore at 2,200, at that price, you don't need a huge number of points for it to pay off, but there is definitely a route where that provides really good value. As I said earlier, though, we could copy that in for Jalen Lane or Luke McCaffrey. Chris Moore is just the player of those 3 I feel is more likely. But if you want to make the same case for the other 2, I wouldn't disagree at all.
Yeah, it's a great shout and an absolutely rock bottom price. So yeah, I think you should be slotting him into 1 or 2 of your lineups.
Anyone else you've got your eye on for a bargain basket pick, Ed?
Yeah, I'm surprised your mate Mason Taylor isn't in the bargain basket this week.
I love Mason Taylor.
I think he'd fit into this category for a tight end. £2,800 on Fantasy Game Day. Carolina are giving up the 2nd most fantasy points per game to tight ends. And a bit like I mentioned with Judkins, I think he's probably due a bounce back after doing absolutely nothing against the Broncos. he is going to be receiving the ball from Justin Fields, which is a problem. But
receiving might be pushing it.
That's pushing it. So maybe I'd be a bit wary. But yeah, I think Taylor could be a solid shout at tight end.
We've ridiculed Justin Fields over the course of this league for that performance last week, but looking at the receiving work that Mason Taylor's had last week was an outlier. In fairness to Justin Fields, it was a bit of an outlier how inept he was at moving the ball towards a play last week. And as you say, with Wilson out, Taylor has got a route to volume. He might not move the ball very far, but as long as it's catchable, it could pay off in PPR formats.
After everything we've said this week, I'd be amazed if Justin Fields doesn't get at least 30 points this week.
Oh, we're going to have to put him down as a hero, aren't we?
Yeah.
Well, that is all we have for week 7. As I said before, why not go and check out our streaming options show and our week 7 preview as well with some starts and sits. But that's all from me, Ed. Unless you have anything further to add?
No, the final London game this weekend, another early game to look forward to for us, even earlier for our American viewers. But yeah, looking forward to Rams-Jags.
So yeah, don't forget to set your lineups before you go to bed in the US if you're relying on that game as well. But we'll be back in week 8. It's all from me. It's all from Ed. So all we have to say is, Malcolm, take us home.
You have been listening to the team from TH Fantasy Football. For more content, follow TH_fantasy_NFL on Twitter and Instagram.